Chapter 15 of A Diamond Sky Above Titanic. A Good Omens fanfiction, written by SeaBlueEyes, read aloud by SkyAsimaru. If you enjoy this podfic, you can check out the original story on Archive of Our Own. If you would like to hear more of my recordings or see some of my own work, you can find me through the pen and screen name of SkyAsimaru. A Diamond Sky Above Titanic. Chapter 15. A Promise Broken. Warning for major character death. What does it feel like to drown? Aziraphale had never understood it. Drowning. You just kick towards the surface. You swim. You keep swimming, up and up, until you find air. That wasn't so hard, was it? It was built into the design, the ability to locate air. There was just one problem in all this, namely, which way to kick, which way was up. Titanic was above him. It shouldn't have been, but Titanic was sinking up into the sky, a sky so black that, like those mysterious dark holes in space that man had yet to discover, it drew all color into its infinite depths, leaching everything else to grayscale. No, to blue. Aziraphale looked at his hands in front of him. His skin, where unburned, was stark white, waning to deepest navy at the edges. It gave the effect of increasing translucency, as though he was fading away, being consumed from the outside in. And there was something further wrong with that image, too. His good hand, empty.
Do not let go of my hand!
His lungs were sinking in on themselves, deflating. His whole body was crumpling, drowning, dying. What does it feel like to drown? It feels like delirium. You are trapped in your own mind, your own pain, seemingly forever. Thoughts, anything but basic instinct, which is not really a thought anyway, are literally impossible. Hold your breath and try to describe how you feel as your whole world is contracted from the inside. And Aziraphale, who could recite Wild word for word, and Dante stanza for stanza, Milton book by book. Aziraphale, who had stood before the emperors of Rome and winced at their grammar. Aziraphale, who would not permit himself his mid-morning all-butter shortbread before the Telegraph's crossword lay complete on his coffee table. Aziraphale found he could not think beyond the words that every soul around him was also crying out, in mind and body.
Air, please!
Death would have found this amusing if he was the sort to feel amusement.
Enough now, Aziraphale,
he said to the dying angel. Fleshless fingers stroked his cheek.
It is time to go home.
Aziraphale jerked his head away, tried again to kick. He was so sure that the ocean had had a surface at some point in its history. Death tugged at his sleeve.
Come on, Aziraphale. Do not make this difficult for me. I have been informed you are a priority tonight.
Aziraphale opened his mouth, but not even bubbles were left to flee now.
Go away!
he cried. "I am home on Earth!" Death was pulling at him now, pulling him in a direction that further pressed against Aziraphale's contracting lungs. The cowled cloak was billowing all around Death like a sea fan, or the proverbial other side of the veil.
"You are confused, Aziraphale,"
said Death to him now. And perhaps he said it sternly, but it was impossible to tell. The white skull was suddenly right there in front of him, and Aziraphale screwed his eyes shut in a flash, for to look into the eye sockets of Death was to embrace Death.
"Your head, it is not functioning correctly. You are not thinking straight. Listen to me."
"Leave me alone!" Aziraphale screamed.
"No, listen to me."
"Never! Let me be! Let me live! Get away from me!"
"Listen to me, Aziraphale."
"Aziraphale, you stupid bugger, listen to me!" Aziraphale snapped his eyes open. Achingly cold water pressed them into their sockets, stabbed at them with blunt edges, blurred his vision. "There's no need to be so bloody harsh, Angel. I'm only trying to help you survive here." A white face, black hair swaying and swirling in liquid darkness like eel grass. Eyes instead of eye sockets. Eyes that would be yellow if such a color could exist down here. Warm hands gripping at him and pulling him in place of those cold, fleshless ones. "Crowley!" Crowley pulled at him harder, jerking him upwards, or perhaps downwards, sideways. "Who else?" Even telepathically, and turned away from him. Aziraphale could imagine gritted teeth, the ferocious concentration igniting his eyes. "The ship's pulling us down, Aziraphale, and fast! We'll be 1,000 fathoms below if you don't bloody work with me here and kick! Swim with me, Aziraphale! Come on! Swim up!" "Which way is up?" "It's up, you great sodding pillock! Now swim for it!" They kicked, they swam, and then, like being born again, though neither of them knew how it felt to be born, they surfaced. Titanic was gone. They surfaced amidst the remaining flotsam, and the shrieking, thrashing crowds, and the bodies, and the 1,000 cries for help. Everywhere screams, everywhere people. 1,500 humans, and an ocean. The former world had passed away. Aziraphale gasped and moaned and sobbed as air flooded his starved and shrunken lungs, at first in relief, but then in pain. Pain as that same life-giving air struck every naked inch of his skin, struck him raw, indistinguishable from fire, charring his flesh with ice. Aziraphale flailed like a human, struggled upwards, pushed down with his feet as though he could vault himself up and out of these flowing knives. And, like a human, he was helpless to know which pain was worse, the knives of the ocean or the knives of the air. Crowley was still gripping his hand. "That angel!" he shouted in Aziraphale's ear. "That was why I told you not to let go of my..." There was a wail and a splash, and Crowley was shoved completely under again as someone dived on him. A man, a human, pushing him down, fighting to stay afloat himself. The man grasped Crowley's shoulder and head, struggling to get above him, struggling to get out of the water. "Stop!" cried Aziraphale in horror, swimming over as fast as he could, frenzied in his panic and fury. "How dare you! How dare you! Get off him!" "I'll drown!" wailed the man pathetically, and still drowning Crowley. "I said, get off him!" And Aziraphale struck the man, struck him ferociously across the face with his wrecked hand as hard as adamantine, again and again, grabbing him by the lifebelt, the coward, in his lifebelt too, striking him until he bled black in the dark, until Crowley burst up and out, gasping and spluttering and dragging in air with all his might, as though choking on his own throat. The man scarpered. Crowley, still hauling in every breath with a moan of pain, stared with huge, incredulous eyes at his angel. "Bloody hell, Aziraphale!" Aziraphale was starting to register what had just happened. He had hit a human. He had practically assaulted him. A human only trying to save himself, just as they were. He had made him bleed. Aziraphale felt sick. Since when had he become so heartless, so lacking in empathy? Or worse, sympathy. What was this night turning him into? "We have to get out of these crowds, Crowley." "I know." Crowley found the angel's hand beneath the water. "We gotta swim for it. Swim with me, Aziraphale." They swam, through the remaining flotsam, through the shrieking, thrashing crowds, through the bodies, and the 1,000 cries for help, through fathers without their daughters, and sons without their mothers, through husbands and brothers and beloved friends, through women, third-class women, far, far too many third class at all. A floating doorframe, merciful raft of refuge, was the demon's target. He slithered over it, fingers blue and stiff, clenching the embellished carvings for support. Aziraphale heaved his wretched, sopping frame up after him, shuddering, gasping. It wasn't big enough for them. Too narrow. Side by side they could lay, but at a cost. Their hanging calves paid it. "I reckon we'll be all right now," Crowley managed to gasp out, addressing the stars above, his teeth chattering audibly. How dare the stars still look so beautiful, he thought. How dare they still shine like diamonds and stand like sentinels, ignoring the tragedy beneath them. They weren't even worth his time. He wrapped a shaking arm around Aziraphale's own, pulling them both together. "We'll be all right." Aziraphale jerked his own arm to link through Crowley's and stared up at the hazy phantoms of their steamy breaths, curling together, the white a terrible juxtaposition against the speckled cloth of the night. All around them the cries for help continued, inescapable. A whistle was blown somewhere. One of the officers calling back the boats. "The boats are coming back, Aziraphale," said Crowley. His words were, to Aziraphale, a lifeline, the one sound in the whole world that made any kind of sense. He clung to that voice. And I don't know about you, but I reckon we've earned our place on one by now, don't you think? Aziraphale couldn't think. Every physical part of him was already numb. He could almost imagine his mind succumbing to the same slow petrification, the curse in his hand spreading across his whole body.
Listen to me, Aziraphale,
Crowley was saying. Aziraphale felt breath warm the side of his face as the demon turned his head.
We are not going to die here. Got it?
Tears leaked out of the corners of the angel's eyes and ran towards his ears. His throat closed even as his lips parted.
I know, dear. No, listen and believe it.
There came a splash of water slapping their raft as the demon moved to properly turn on his side.
Aziraphale, think of all the things that you love back at home.
Aziraphale hadn't been expecting that.
What? Just you think about it, yeah? All the things that you're going to see or do again.
When the angel said nothing, he went on.
Like your bookshop, Zira?
Aziraphale turned his head, met those eyes, almost colorless in the gloom, an inch from his own. The slitted pupils were so dilated in compensation for the darkness that they were nearly as round as a human's.
My bookshop? Yeah, Angel,
said Crowley, nodding convulsively.
Remember that? And your books?
My books?
Yeah, your Bibles and your prophecies and your Wilds and Homers and those missing Dead Sea Scrolls.
Aziraphale's eyes unfocused.
My books, he murmured. And scones, Zira. Remember scones? With strawberry jam and clotted cream? And the crossword in the Telegraph. Remember that?
Aziraphale tried to swallow, but found he couldn't.
I remember. And the proms. Remember when we went to see every one of them one year?
Something not dissimilar to a smile was fighting its way onto the angel's freezing blue lips.
I remember. And helping the human race. You're good at that, yeah, Angel?
Aziraphale let out a strangled croak that just might have been a short, quiet, broken laugh.
I am.
Crowley reached out and clasped the angel's good hand to his chest.
We're going to make it, Aziraphale, he said firmly, and those massive eyes of his left no room for argument. We're going to see and do all of those things again. Got it?
Aziraphale nodded and nodded.
I believe you, my dear. I believe you.
Crowley's lips, dark against his ghostly blue skin, curved jerkily up into a smile.
Now, it's your turn. What are my favourite things, Zira? Tell me what I'm going to see again, and we'll just keep talking, okay? the boats'll be coming back for us, Zira. But till then, we've just gotta keep talking, keep thinking."
Aziraphale thought of Crowley's favorite things and started talking. It was getting quiet. A whimper, a feeble cry, an occasional distant splash. Nothing louder penetrated the night. Other than Aziraphale. Aziraphale kept talking. Crowley kept listening. To Crowley, his words were a lifeline, the one sound in the whole world that made any kind of sense. He clung to that voice. It told him they were still alive. The minutes went by. Aziraphale was running out of ideas. "Mozart," he murmured, though it was possible that he had already mentioned that one. "Golden delicious." He glanced to his side. Crowley dear, if I'm playing this game, then you'd certainly better be listening." There was no sound for a moment. Then came a soft, lethargic hiss in response, out of the dark, seeming to take immense effort.
"I'm listening, Angel. Just keep going. Love the sound of your voice."
"Crowley, you're hissing."
"I know. Happens when I'm dying of hypothermia."
All was quiet and unmoving. There wasn't a breath of wind to ripple the silent ocean. No waves either, or frantic splashing from dying humans. This was because everyone was already dead. The Atlantic was as silent as a graveyard, because it was a graveyard. The bodies on the surface of the water bobbed ever so slightly. There were 1,500 of them, floating together, of all kinds of people. The fathers, the sons, the husbands and brothers, beloved friends, the women. Each one was completely frozen. It had been a full 10 minutes since Titanic had gone under. 10 minutes, 600 seconds. That was as long as it took. Crowley and Aziraphale were still lying on their backs against their floating reprieve, side by side. Crowley's fingers were frozen around Aziraphale's own, those of the angel's remaining good hand resting on his chest. He couldn't have released this hold, even if he had tried. It was so quiet. Water lapped into their stiff hair, against their shoulders, against the backs of their thighs. Their skin was blue, their lips black. There were ice crystals in their noses and the corners of their mouths, in their hair and eyebrows. They had no strength left to warm themselves. Earlier, Crowley had channeled all the heat he could into Aziraphale beside him, and had felt Aziraphale transferring all his heat into him in turn. But that had been then, back when they could feel their legs and their fingertips, back when they had cared enough to understand why they were waiting to die in the middle of the Atlantic, back when they had had strength enough to remember who they were, what they were. Remember that they had power enough to stay alive. It didn't matter any more that Crowley was a demon and Aziraphale was an angel. Right now they were human. Right now, with heaven and hell perhaps minutes away, the two couldn't have seemed more insignificant. It was incomprehensible, but true. They were still on Earth, and still together. The future was unimportant. Crowley, like Aziraphale beside him, was staring at the diamond sky above them. Stars, innumerable, the tiniest pinpricks of light amidst all that blue-black emptiness. The misty trail of an arm of the Milky Way, strange little constellations, so far away. His languid eyes drew patterns, painting words and scenes and symbols out of the dots. He felt small, so incredibly small.
Star of God.
His lips twitched. Then, slowly, brokenly, he chuckled. The sound caught in his throat on his second breath, came out more like a sob. His whole jaw was aching from back when he'd had enough energy for his teeth to chatter. He tried to laugh again. The sound had substance, and it floated above him like a ghostly spectre before the night tore it apart. Then, abruptly, he thought of something.
Aziraphale.
No response. He went on anyway. Suddenly, he needed to know this. He couldn't believe that it had never occurred to him to ask in all their almost 6 millennia together. It was worth the immense effort it took to speak.
Azira, what's your name mean?
Aziraphale still didn't answer.
Come on, Angel.
Crowley turned his head, heard ice crystals rustle as they crinkled.
I told you mine. Now you gotta tell me yours.
Aziraphale was still staring impassively up at heaven. There was no breath stirring the air above him, no rise and fall of his chest. Crowley felt something cold stab somewhere deep.
Aziraphale?
A beat, then an octave higher.
Aziraphale?
Crowley saw that there were ice crystals on Aziraphale's open eyes. He saw that there were feathers spreading from beneath him, like blood seeping from a mortal wound. He saw. Crowley felt his throat contract. He felt himself stop breathing.
Aziraphale.
The breath he held came out in fluttering little bursts as his chest convulsed.
No!
Crowley's voice sounded all wrong. It didn't sound like his voice. There was something jagged piercing his throat, something filling his eyes, burning them.
No, Angel! Wake up! Wake up, Aziraphale!
Aziraphale didn't.
Wake up, Aziraphale!
Scrambling, weak and shaking with terror, Crowley pushed himself up with one arm and shook the angel hard as the thing in his throat grew, threatened to engulf him completely, and the liquid in his eyes clung to his lashes. The water around them rippled, shaking their raft.
Wake up, Aziraphale! Wake up!
Angry now, shaking him harder.
Aziraphale!
But he couldn't pretend. He couldn't hide. Aziraphale was never going to wake up. Aziraphale was in heaven. Aziraphale was gone.
"Don't do this to me, Angel!" Crowley cried. His lips trembled, then crumpled in on themselves. "Come back! Aziraphale, come back!" Demons are not supposed to cry. Most have lost the ability. "Aziraphale, I promised!" Crowley wailed. "I promised I wouldn't leave you! I promised I'd stay!" Demons are not supposed to cry, but Crowley was powerless. "I promised!" His eyes were burning, and then his cheeks scorching pain, as something wet and slick and hot escaped, ran in rivulets to catch on his lips. Steam rose in wisps to join his breath where the tears seared his skin. They throbbed and they scalded, burning raw tracks down his face, hissing as they fell on the angel. Demons are not supposed to cry. Just as it burns to express their love, so it burns to express their loss. And now, for the first time in his existence, Anthony J. Crowley, the demon, the serpent of Eden, the star of God, squeezed his eyes shut, laid his head down on the angel's chest, and wept. His arms curled up to cradle the two of them together, and he could smell him even through the salt water, the books, and the beeswax, and the tea leaves, and the rosewater hand cream, and the Eden, that soft fragrance, that very essence of Aziraphale, everything the angel had ever loved and stood for. It was more than he could bear. One word escaped him before grief crushed his throat completely closed, sealing him in his heartbreak. Aziraphale. Aziraphale was dead, and Crowley was all alone in the world. Crowley, sobbing his broken demonic heart out, buried his face into Aziraphale, his beloved, his angel, and waited for hell to claim him. The first crewman to see it thought he was hallucinating. So did the second. It was only when young 5th Officer Harry Lowe's torchlight caught it, then came back, startled, and captured it, and every other man on the boat stopped what he was doing to stare, that they dismissed post-traumatic stress disorder. It looked like 2 fallen swans. The wings were so white and flawless and lustrous. But no, these wings were much, much too large, much too powerful to be of any bird they knew of. They rode closer, barely breathing. Lowe's light brought the strange beings ever into clearer view. They saw where white wings disappeared into suits. They saw dark hair and fair curls pressed against each other. They saw blue faces and black lips, and eyes frozen forever up at the heavens, and eyes closed. Then they saw a slit of bright reptilian yellow in the gloom, as one heavy-lidded eye slid listlessly open and stared into the harsh electric glare. Later that night, when the yellow-eyed stranger's wings had ebbed into his back, and he had fallen unconscious beneath the blankets they had swathed around his half-frozen body, the crew of Lifeboat 14 made a silent vow never to tell a soul of the 2 embracing angels in the flotsam of the Titanic. They all knew what they had seen, and they would hold it unspoken, unlamented in their hearts for the rest of their lives. But the rest of the world need not share their sorrow. The rest of the world already had enough tragedy to deal with. To be continued in Chapter 16.
Thank you for reading. Please drop by the archive and let the author know what you thought of their work.